All right, we're on now. So I'll do that all again. Hello and welcome. Today we are bringing to you all our third webinar in this series. You are not the hero. Andy, this is your title. I'm not going to ask you to pipe up, but pretty provocative. 2 in 2 weeks. We've got provocative titles. So for some reason, we just like really trying to grab people's attention. Obviously, fluoro yellow really does help as well, and a bit of neon. But this is a bit of an attention-seeking title that is very much linked with some of the key concepts, not only to what we teach at Proform University, but also how we do physio, how we do healthcare at Proform Physio. One of the most important things to understand, to process, and to grapple with, especially early in your career, is understanding that although human nature is for us to feel and want and strive to be the center of every world that we're in, sometimes we're just not in that center of the world. All right, and that's what we're going to uncover today. We're going to unpack that. We're going to have a little bit of engagement as well, because I don't want to talk for 45 minutes and no one wants to listen to that. So without further ado, we shall dive in. And this, as you can tell by this slide in particular, and Andy's previous references to Skynet and the 90s and playing video games, these references are all Andy's, and we're going to have some fun with them because he can't talk up and he can't defend himself. Guys, show of hands really quickly, and only Andy and Vinay, I can see your cameras, but Sabrina, you're also safe on this. If you want to open your camera, that'd be awesome. Who knows where this screenshot is from? Yeah, show of hands. Yeah, okay, cool. We're all nerds here. Fantastic. I love that. That is great. Vinay, why have you got a cheesy grin already?
Oh, just my brothers were obsessed with Lord of the Rings when I was a kid. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Cool. So yeah, like as Vinay mentioned, this is from Lord of the Rings. Pretty cool scene. I do have to also take this moment to shout out our graphic designer, because we sent her a 5-minute loom and just went, do your best and please give us something usable and make sense of our brains and what we were thinking. This is what she came up with. Now, as we know, Lord of the Rings is a story. It's a quest. It's a trilogy of quests in particular, but it's a trilogy of quests, right? And it, at its core, it's a hero's journey. It is the journey of Frodo on his quest to find the One Ring. And Andy and I have been talking about this as an analogy, as a metaphor for what we do in healthcare for the better part of 12 months now, since we've been working really closely together on this little project. And it actually is really elegant and really, really quite appropriate when we think about healthcare. And as we go through and unpack, you'll hopefully be able to understand a little bit more about why that is so important. But if we move on, and this is another pretty cool slide, I'm not going to lie. I believe the exact prompt we gave for this was, we need a slide from Lord of the Rings that reflects Frodo almost achieving his task. I'm pretty sure that's exactly what I said. Now, if you have watched these, as Andy has, and as Vinay may have picked up some of it with his brothers who are incredibly obsessed, this graphic represents Frodo almost reaching for the ring. Now, in healthcare, we could flip this across, and we could see this as an analogy for our patients reaching out for their goal. If we're in the fitness industry, for a personal trainer, strength and conditioning coach, we might be looking at this as our patient or our client reaching for that next step, whether that's an athletic, whether that's a national competition, whether that's losing 5 kilos, whatever the case may be. In physio, it could even be, walking again after a knee replacement. I know Vinay and I have had conversations over the last few months where that's been a thing that he's been working on with patients in his clinical practice. So that's a really cool little analogy. We can actually paint that as a metaphor, and I'm going to turn that off because that's awful. Guys, what I really did want to do, especially here, is actually introduce the concept of the journey. Okay. Now, in this scene, as you can see, Frodo's the only one in the scene. Frodo's all there is. He's the hero. He is the hero of the journey. When we're looking at healthcare, just quick show of hands. Has anybody ever felt like they have been personally responsible and they've taken on all of the responsibility for their patients, whether that's their recovery, their healing, or just the emotional baggage that comes with working with healthcare and working with patients? Has anyone ever experienced that? I know I have. If you want to unmute yourself, you can too. Vinay, I know I'm just going to pick on you because you're there and you're sitting right below me, but you've been doing this for good solid 8 years now, right? If I'm remembering correctly. I'm sure you can think of a few times, probably a few times every month where you've experienced these kinds of things where you almost like feel like you're getting caught absorbing the baggage that comes from your patients.
Yeah, 100%. More so when it goes wrong. Because I think when things go wrong, people want to look for someone to blame, and they want to attribute responsibility for someone. More often than not, like it's you.
So when it goes right, you don't think about this as much. You're like, yeah, cool. This is a bit of an ego boost kind of thing.
Not as much, because I think for things to go right, there has to be a lot of accountability on the patient's part. So a lot of the time when things go right, it's because of the patient's hard work, not always yours.
Okay.
Because there's only so much you can do for them.
Interesting. I like that. You've jumped to the end of my my little presentation here, mate.
There's a whole journey on the way.
I appreciate that. Thank you for that. You've just absolutely derailed me. But what's really important, right, about this, and you actually just touched on it, right? If Frodo is your patient, you're Gandalf. Again, we're all pretty familiar with the Lord of the Rings story here, but for those who aren't, Gandalf is the guide who appears in the Lord of the Rings series and guides Frodo along his journey, providing him with the guidance, support, and wisdom that Frodo needs at the right times in the right dosages. Okay. He doesn't take the journey away from Frodo. He doesn't come in, swoop in, and take control and achieve all that Frodo was set out to achieve. Okay. In healthcare, pretty much the same. We are not there to, as Vinay mentioned, we're not there to take over. We're not there to force our patients to do anything, right? We can't do that. Everyone's human. We all have free will. What we can do is we can correctly and adequately frame a problem and frame a solution, communicate that effectively, and guide our patients along that journey. All right. Does that all make sense, guys? Yep. Nod along. If not, yep. Thank you, Andy. Because here's the thing, right? When we are working in healthcare, as we've kind of touched on, and as I'm sure you guys can experience as well, if we don't position ourselves as a guide, what can end up happening is we can feel like we're taking on everything that happens, positive or negative, and that can actually weigh us down. If we're not framing ourselves in the right way as the guide and positioning ourselves as the guide, that can lead to some pretty emotionally damaging things like burnout, right? Andy and I have discussed this at length in multiple webinars, but I've lived a few stories of that in my career, and a lot of that came from not being able to position myself as a guide. Okay. So we've got Frodo and we've got Gandalf. Now, all good movies have those two things. They have the hero, they have the guide, right? When they're a quest, when they're a journey, they have the hero, they have the guide. But what if Lord of the Rings was written from this guy's perspective? What would Lord of the Rings look like? Vinay, you had a little smirk there. Would it change the plot? Do you reckon?
Yeah, 100%. It'd be a lot of riding on horseback.
Be a lot of riding on horseback. Look, we're going to leave those jokes alone, but yeah, a lot of riding on horseback. I've had a really long beard. I've had a pretty massive beard in a previous life. That beard would not have been easy to maintain. So hats off. Yeah. Andy's just fired up in the chat. Frodo had Gandalf, Luke had Yoda, and Harry had Dumbledore. So we've got a few different stories, right? So, if you're not a Lord of the Rings fan and you're watching this back on the recording, Luke had Yoda in the good trilogy, if I'm gonna be so bold, and Harry had Dumbledore. But you're right, Vinay. Like it would be quite boring, right? There'd be a lot of horseback. We'd probably be looking at something that would actually look a lot similar to the Man from Snowy River, but it'd also be pretty boring. Goku had Master Roshi. Yes, thank you, Vinay. Thank you. Good reference. I actually appreciate that one. It'd be a pretty boring plot, right? It'd be a pretty boring movie if we were just following this guy around and then all of a sudden we're done, right? The reason we bring this up, right, is because if we're looking at this from our patient's perspective, if we're looking at this from our client's perspective, if we position ourselves like this guy and we follow the movie plot line of our patient, but just have the film camera on us as the physio, as the healthcare practitioner, and that's the story, it stands to reason that our patients would be pretty bored, right? They wouldn't be engaged. They wouldn't buy in. They wouldn't trust us. And we may not get them any results. Vinay, like you mentioned, like sometimes we just don't get the results, right? Early in our careers, I'm sure we can all relate to this, where you're struggling to get that connection, get that click with your patients, get that click with your clients. And you end up sitting there after the consult going, something's missing here. We mentioned this last week. We talked about communication. We've talked about meeting people where they're at before. And that's a concept that's critical as we talk about being fulfilled in our healthcare careers, but it's also something that's important when we are framing problems, okay, when we are positioning ourselves as the hero. Now, I'm going to open this up to Andy really quickly because I know he loves this concept a lot. And this is by a guy, correct me if I'm wrong, Andy, this is from a guy called Joseph Campbell.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Joseph Campbell. Yeah, see, I didn't butcher it. That's awesome. And I'm going to open the floor up to Andy because this is the, as you can see on the screen, guys, this is the hero's journey. All right. Now, the hero's journey has a few different key points in that, which I'm going to let Andy unpack. And then we're going to bring it back. And we're going to talk about this. We're going to reflect on this and see how this actually can apply to our careers in health and fitness. Andy,
yeah,
yours.
Thanks for handing over the floor, Josh. I appreciate it. I think there's a couple of key things that you sort of alluded to there, Josh, is that when we think about ourselves as practitioners, as a clinician or as coaches or someone guiding someone else or servicing a client or doing anything like that, there is often, whether it's an expectation that's placed on ourselves, whether it's an expectation that we feel as though we need to step into. But, to quote the old Coldplay song, like we might feel as though we need to fix people, we need to do things for them. And that's what constitutes a service mindset. And as Josh was talking about before, I guess a lot of the times when we take on that, we also take on all the responsibilities that come with that. And if these things that we take responsible for aren't necessarily things that we can go ahead and control, when things go haywire and we can't control for them, like Josh was saying, some of these things can lead to a lot of overwhelm, a lot of burnout, a lot of energy wasted, a lot of you feeling frazzled and actually not sure which way is up, which way to go. So when we talk about these positions from a storytelling perspective, human beings for the longest time have always communicated through stories. You think about every myth and legend that's communicated through history, they all have meaning. You talk about every good movie that's ever existed, they all existed within this hero's journey framework. And it's something that we all resonate with as human beings, right? So I think as I go through this, I think you'll see it from a narrative perspective, its utility, but also too, like I guess again, and what I really hope that you get at the end of this is rather than thinking about, okay, well, how can I become more of a guide, but rather how can you exalt yourself to that position, because that's the position where you're well and truly of service. To talk about, say, Gandalf in particular with Lord of the Rings, if Gandalf didn't do what he did for Frodo, he wouldn't be of service to Frodo to allow him to go with the journey and get his goal at the end of the day. And the same thing goes for Yoda, and the same thing goes for Dumbledore. Those sorts of people, if they're not positioned correctly and deployed correctly at the right times with the right amount of incentive, I guess the people at the end of the day, the heroes, your patients, your clients, whoever it is that you're working with, they miss out. you know? So it's really important that, I guess, in order for the successful outcome to occur, we need to exalt ourselves to our position. So that way, I guess the hero, your patient, your client, whoever, can exalt themselves into theirs. And ultimately, and this is one thing that I know we talk about a lot at Proform, is we build autonomy. We don't fix people and we do maintenance checks. We try to foster autonomy. So, and with that, as we go towards the hero's journey, you can see the hero itself. They have a call to adventure. There's a supernatural aid, which in this case might be a talisman, might be an exercise program for our physiotherapy clients. It might be a dietetics program. It might be a sleep hygiene ritual or something to that effect. Okay. And then what ends up happening is that through the process of the ebbing and flowing and the toing and froing of the rehabilitative process or the rehab journey, to carry on the same analogy, there's a lot of things that happen, right? There's challenges and tribulations, okay? There's a point where there's almost a revelation of sorts, where there is, not without getting too melodramatic, but there's an era of death, like a death of an old self, okay? So if we were to think about a patient of ours, okay, the death of a previous self is the death of their pain self, okay? The one that was in pain, the one that was perhaps having a bit of a victim mentality, the one that had negative self-beliefs, the one that didn't have the confidence to think that they could play with their kids because their shoulder problem was really, you know, it was really affecting them, or they felt like they could never go back to the gym and be the fit person they always wanted to be because they had a crippling knee injury, whatever the case may be. There are different layers of death and revelation that come with that, and then once they've come to terms with that, there's often a level of transformation and atonement, which then leads to a return. So when they actually go back to their known thing, so if you think about an athlete who's going to on their return to play strategy or their return to work strategy in the case of a work cover patient, perhaps, you know, they're going back to their old environment, but they're better for it. So they're actually a 2.0 version of themselves. So if you remember at the end of at Harry Potter, when everything's all said and done and Voldemort's been vanquished, and Harry comes back and he's a different person in the world now, a lot wiser for it, a lot more sturdy, a lot more resilient for all of the things that he's learned throughout of his journey. And the same is said for Frodo, and the same is said for Luke, the same is said for Katniss Everdeen. All those major protagonists that we see in a lot of heroes' journeys, we can often see that. And it's a really useful template for us to be able to use when we're applying it to our patients as well, because the benefits are you exalt yourself to your rightful position as a guide, which allows you to actually be able to effect meaningful change in a realm which is suitable, which also doesn't which maximizes your input without depleting your energy, and it also doesn't take anything away from your patient to actually learn from the experience and become better for it. So, guys, that is the hero's journey in a nutshell. Joseph Campbell, The Hero of a Thousand Faces, great book if you wanted to look into it. But that's all I got to say. Josh, I'll hand it back to you, mate.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing that, Andy. That was almost like you prepared that. Almost like you prepared it. Right. Look, there's two really big things apart from the things that Andy's touched on there that I'd really like to delve into. First and foremost is actually the fact that if you look at this graphic, this is cyclical. So to Andy's point, once they return, once they come to that actually allows them to continue on their adventure or continue on another adventure, right? Continue the process. So we talk about this a lot at Proform. We talk about partnering with our patients for life. So this allows us to not have an end point and a stopping point, but it allows it to continue around, which allows us to then be able to pick up a new journey, pick up a new goal, a new challenge. We see this time and again in healthcare where somebody comes in with knee pain because they want to run a 5K, but then all of a sudden you get them through the 5K, you get them through that, and then all of a sudden now they want to squat a 1RM, something like that, right? So there's always new goals and there's always new challenges that our clients want to face. And by having an appropriate way to guide them and to share with them, and as Andy mentioned, build autonomy within that process, that's going to far outweigh anything we can do in terms of fixing our patients. The other thing I wanted to touch on there was a bit of the abyss and the death and rebirth. Okay, in other frameworks, in other thought processes, this could also be known as framing a concept of heaven and hell. Okay, heaven and hell is something we use a lot in our consults, not in a bad way, not in a manipulative way, but it allows us to frame the problem that a patients come with, a problem that a clients come with, in two ways. It allows us to give them this fork in the road, this decision that they can make of what's the dream outcome, what's the ideal, what happens, what changes if we do something about this today, or on the contrary, what happens if we do nothing about it? What's the worst case scenario? What's that hell outcome? Okay. We use this to frame problems so that when our clients sit down and we frame this, our clients get to then make a choice. And that choice will set the trajectory for the remainder of that journey, be it positive or negative. Now, that's not our place as practitioners to make that decision for them. There's a reason we frame it. There's a reason we sit there and ask the question. Andy, I'm sure can vouch for this. There's several times throughout the year where you ask this question to a new patient and you're met with crickets because they're not quite sure what you're actually asking, because they sit there and like, well, I haven't really been asked that question. But what this does is it allows us to sit back, to zoom back, and to be the guide and to really position ourselves right from the get-go as the guide. As Andy's tossed in the chat there, heaven and hell is useful for framing. Okay. It allows us to ask these questions of what is the return on investment for engaging in X? Okay. What is the return on investment for not engaging? Okay. And what do you want to do knowing this? Okay. They're really good questions to ask. They're really good questions that you can apply not only to healthcare, not only to personal training, to fitness. You could apply these to business as well. All right. So we talked a lot about guides. Andy's talked about guides. I've talked about guides. What the heck is an actual guide? Okay. A guide has two main characteristics, two main traits, I guess you'd call them. They have the ability to build trust and foster trust with their clients, with their patients, with the people around them, the people they're partnering with. They also have empathy. Okay. Just as Frodo trusted Gandalf, our clients need to trust us too. Okay. Similarly with empathy, if for those nerds of us on this call, Gandalf never forced Frodo into any situations that he wasn't ready for. He listened, he understood, and he adapted his guidance based on where Frodo was at emotionally. This is incredibly crucial and incredibly powerful in the clinical setting, because our patients won't always come in level-headed. When we're in pain, I'm sure we've all had an injury at some stage. When we're in pain, we're quite emotional, and it can be a struggle to think rationally. Our patients coming in like that time and again, and we see this time and again at Proform. The stronger we establish ourselves as the guide from the get-go, the stronger and more resilient those relationships and those partnerships are with our clients. If we don't do this effectively and we don't position ourselves as the guide effectively, we put a heck of a lot of pressure on ourselves to fix our patients, okay? Because that's the only other solution we've got. And if we're the hero in someone else's story, like I mentioned before, we're on a one-way ticket to burnout. We're on a one-way ticket to running out of progression. We're on a one-way ticket to lack of fulfillment. All these things that, if you're in the healthcare space long enough, it's very normal and it's very natural to experience these emotions. And I'm sure that we can all experience it. And I'd like to pick on, again, sorry, Vinay, but you're sitting right there. You're sitting right there, mate. I can't apologize too much. These feelings of like burnout, these feelings of struggling to wrap our head around how to help the person that's in front of us. Can you think of any times recently or any times in your early in your career in particular where you might have had this more often than not?
Yeah, especially the early days. I think the early days you see someone and then you treat them and the expectation is that they're going to get better. Then they come in the next week and the week after that, and they're just not improving. And no matter what you do, you've assessed, you've reassessed, you've tried different interventions, you've tried all sorts of modalities, and things just don't seem to be moving the needle for them. And you kind of sit there almost confused as to why isn't this journey going the way I want it to. It happens a lot.
Yeah, no, that's it. It's really common, especially early in your career when you don't quite have the runs on the board, right?
Yeah.
Sabrina, if you're able to unmute yourself, if my memory serves, you joined us for Geordie's Women's Health webinar. Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
Now, again, I'm going to challenge my memory. That means you are a third-year student? Hey,
yeah.
How good. How good. Well done. Well done. Snaps for Josh. Have you done any placements just yet or no?
Yeah, I've done a PTA placement and I have experience working as a physio assistant.
Yeah, cool. Have you seen any of this happen maybe while you're working as a physio assistant, maybe as a fly on the wall with some of the other physios you've worked with?
I'm a physio assistant at like an aged care, so like people are more so at the end of their life kind of thing. So eventually you do see them go downhill. So I guess you could say, yeah, in that sense, I have seen them all like one week they're walking about and then they have fallen and the next week they can't get out of their wheelchair. So yeah, I think yeah.
Have you ever been able to sit back and give yourself a chance to kind of just analyze how the other physios in the aged care environment in particular interact with the residents?
Yeah, for sure. Um, I think with aged care, you kind of get a bit attached to residents sometimes. Um, Especially if you see them so often and then to see them go downhill pulls on your heartstrings sometimes, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, there's it's funny you bring that up because and it's really cool that you have that aged care experience because I'm sure I know myself, I did an aged care placement. If my memory serves, Andy's done an aged care placement too and worked in that kind of field. Um, there's actually a lot of similarities between the aged care environment, the aged care system, if you will, and private practice in that we do develop a lot of emotional connection with our patients. It's only natural, it's only normal. Andy, you've got your hand raised.
I didn't want to take away from your point, but like I thought it's a really interesting one because when I look at this framework and one of the things that I continually try to lead people on with this idea, I don't know if I've actually talked about it on these calls before, but it's a difference between being nice and being kind. Does that make sense, Sabrina?
Yeah.
The difference between being nice and being
Yeah.
kind? Because I guess one thing that you'll notice with the I guess the ones who like your seniors
Hmm.
particularly, right? They really take on the status of the guide, and sometimes one of the things that they do for the I guess for the residents there, especially when it comes to something as simple as doing like respiratory stuff or doing sit to stands and stuff like that, and the patients don't want to do it, but they know it's for their betterment, so they'll actually put themselves in a position where, like, yeah, and while it might tug on your heartstrings a little bit, and actually might make them put into a position where I guess the patient isn't having a really good time, but it's actually for that patient's betterment. Whereas I guess, and sometimes we got to make sure that we guess, oh, by positioning ourselves as the guide, we are actually able to see past the discomfort of some of the things that we put people through. Like for instance, like I know when I was working in aged care, we had to do a lot of, I guess we had a lot of trachea patients. We had to do a lot of suctioning. We had to do a lot of other things which were not very comfortable at all, and used to hate doing it so much, and I guess, and because like if I, from what I understand from anyone who gets involved in allied health, be it physio, chiro, or whatever, they're highly empathic for the most part. Okay, they care about people and they want people to do well. But it becomes conflicting when you want people to do well. You don't want them to suffer, but part of what you're doing is making them uncomfortable, albeit transiently or albeit acutely, but they are in pain, even though it might mean later on they might be better. It's a really tricky thing, and sometimes like I've seen people like it really frazzles them. It's like where they don't want to do certain things because I guess the emotional attachment that they have, or the power that they have empathically, is sometimes overwhelming. And that's not to say that that's really a bad thing. It's really not. It actually shows that they care quite a fair bit. But once again, I think going back to this framework, yes, if we can position ourselves correctly, we can actually have that same level of empathy, but also action things which are going to be most appropriate for the person. And without sounding too crass, don't feel too bad about it. You know what I mean? Like it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one. But I think positioning and framing is key there.
Yeah, I think something that Andy did touch on there is like there's a balance. I don't know if we've got any Marvel fans in here as well, but it's almost like Thanos when he's got the sword balancing on his finger. It's like these two things, this trust and this empathy, need to be well balanced, and that can change relative to the situation and relative to the scenario that you're in. But as Andy mentioned, if we have a crippling amount of an overwhelming amount of empathy, it can actually hinder our ability to be that guide. And it's really cool that he touched on that, because how do we be the guide? It's a great question. And he touched on it a little bit there, but the answer lies in the Therapeutic Alliance. Andy, I'm not going to ask you to unmute yourself, so don't worry. But the Therapeutic Alliance is something that has been at Proform and part of what we do at Proform for a really long time now. And I'm going to give you the really boring dictionary definition of what the Therapeutic Alliance is, and then we're going to run through it. All right. Therapeutic Alliance refers to the trusting, collaborative relationship between a therapist and a client, where both people work together towards shared treatment goals. Bit of a mouthful, bit of rubbish. Let's move on from the boring stuff, because this is actually more fun. This is what the Therapeutic Alliance looks like on a day-to-day. And that's just because Andy and I love memes. The Therapeutic Alliance is meeting people where they're at. Okay. Patient on one side, you on the other, big old handshake in the middle. I wish that was my bicep, and Andy wishes that was his. But we meet people where they're at. Okay. That is what we do. We build trust, we work on shared goals, and we have respect for one another. To bring it back to Lord of the Rings, Gandalf had support and supported, and he had belief in Frodo. And that allowed Frodo to feel empowered, and he overcame a lot of self-doubt and faced his fears. We do a very similar thing in physio with our patients. Vinay, you've heard of this a few weeks ago when we jumped on a call and we had a bit of a chat about these kinds of things. Has this been something you've been able to incorporate into your clinic practice recently?
Yeah, definitely. It's just about reassuring them that you're on this path together and they're not alone in it. I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a lot of building confidence in your patient. That's a lot of building confidence that they're not alone. And that also then allows you, as you're going through that, to kind of gauge their readiness to embark on that journey, right? Like I'm sure we've all sat through the lectures at uni where we talk about treatment mapping and we talk about treatment planning. And if you have the very textbook definition of that, they'd tell you that for an acute injury you need to see them 2 times a week for this and that whatever else the case may be. But if you don't adequately assess the readiness of your client to be able to Andy's point earlier, to build autonomy, then we may actually be setting our patients up to fail, even if we are looking with the best intentions of building a therapeutic alliance. Reason I bring this up is because there's a really nice example where in Lord of the Rings, Gandalf regularly was gauging Frodo's mental and physical capacity to be able to embark on the journey on his own. He was there, he interjected at certain periods and at the right moments to be able to refocus Frodo on the path that he was about to undertake. Okay. What's really important for us as physios is that we also use this to be able to tailor our interventions. Cookie cutter rehab programs don't really fall within the Therapeutic Alliance. If we can have this absolute beautiful mind masterpiece of a rehab program, but if the client just doesn't have time because they're working 2 jobs because money's tight and they've got 3 kids at home, we need to meet them where they're at. That beautiful mind rehab program, that's just not going to help them. So we need to be able to understand where our patient is at in order to be able to meet them where they're at, tailor these interventions appropriately to build confidence and build autonomy. Anything to add, Andy? You got your head tilted. No, we're good. Let's move on then. Let's move on. Let's power through. We're doing well. We're doing well. So I'll say it again. We've got being a guide. We understand being a guide. We've now unpacked and uncovered the Therapeutic Alliance and what it is. So how do we actually be the guide tangibly? Like this. That is a really bright white screen after you've just been staring at black and neon for a while. So to build an appropriate, or to build a sustainable therapeutic alliance, we need to have these 6 major skills locked and loaded and ready to pull on them. We need to be able to zoom in and zoom out. Now, I'm sitting in here looking in front of a camera, so I've got a great analogy in front of me, and it's something that has been attributed to me a lot recently, is this ability to zoom in and zoom out. What that means is it means that we need to be able to see what's in front of us, see the patient that is in front of us, but also be able to see the bigger picture, zoom out and see everything else that's around that patient. More often than not, when our clients come to us and they're in pain or they're stressed or they're anxious, they're going to have the blinders on. If you've ever watched the Melbourne Cup and the little racehorses, they have the little blinders on to block out their peripheral vision. Our patients are a lot like that. They don't have the ability to see the bigger picture. It's our job to be able to do that so that we know where they're at and we can frame their journey and frame our role in their journey appropriately. Number two, we need to be able to onboard. Now, onboarding, it's not that complicated. It's just Andy's word. I love Andy's word. It's great. We need to be able to communicate. If we cannot communicate what we have seen and what we've assessed in our ability to zoom in, zoom out, see the bigger picture, see all of the other aspects, the other factors in our client's life that may be playing a role in why they've come to see us. If we can't communicate that, we're going to get nowhere. We're not going to be able to onboard them. We're not going to be able to build that therapeutic alliance. Number three, we need to learn the skill of professional separation. Now, as Andy was mentioning before, Sabrina, this is where we're talking about not taking it too personally, right? If we become so caught up in the empathy side and giving from that perspective, then what happens is we lose that ability to have that professional separation. That is not to say that we become heartless and callous, but that is to say that we know where our role ends and where it is of critical importance that we also protect our energy for the other people that we're working with, the other people that we have to serve on any given day, week, month, year. Flowing on from that, we also have to develop tactical empathy. Now, tactical empathy is a bit of an interesting one. It is not sympathy. It is not pity, but it is tactical, and tactical in the dosage, tactical in the delivery. Okay. Andy loves this phrase. Andy really does. He's used this on me more times than I can count in the last 12 months. But what it allows us to do is it allows us to dose our empathy in such a way where it actually develops some power, it develops some weight behind it, some gravitas behind it, where it can actually be used to help our client through a tough time, guide our patient through a particularly troublesome period, whether that's we're seeking some clarity from a sports doctor or whether we are trying to pull on the right thread to get their rehab ball really rolling. We need to be able to use that, our ability to empathize with our clients, to be able to give them the confidence that we're right there alongside them. Speaking of being right there alongside them, we need to be able to give them a really clear plan. And we actually need to give them several clear plans. Okay. These plans are how we frame, as Andy's just mentioned, the call to action. Okay. And that call to action could be also phrased as a call to adventure. Okay. But we can't raise that until we've actually presented them with plans. Those plans are really important. Now, I've got here on the slide just one plan, but we need to have multiple plans because, as we know, human existence is quite complicated, quite messy, and quite chaotic. So when plan A doesn't go to plan, we need plan B, plan C, and we need to be able to, as the sixth word there is, we need to be able to pivot. Now, if I've got any people who love Friends on this call who are watching this back, we've got memes coming out our eyeballs about this one. It's one of my favorite scenes from Friends. But you need to be able to pivot. You need to be able to pivot from plan A to plan B, plan C, all the way through effectively, quickly, and in a way that breeds confidence from your client that you are positioned appropriately and that you are guiding them in the best possible fashion. Does that all make sense, guys? Because I've just talked for the last 3 minutes. Does anyone have any questions? Sabrina, you were nodding along quite a lot in there, especially early on in that. Do you have any questions? Did anything stand out to you?
No questions. I think, yeah, I think everything you said has resonated with me, the professional separation. I think going into prac, I think I need to understand where my role it has to come in. And then, plan, I think definitely coming up with different plans, especially if a patient is like super busy having a plan for when they're really busy compared to when they're not too busy kind of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really tough skill to have. Do you have any ideas of how you might approach that? I know it's all hypothetical for you right now, but like we just mentioned, we love plans here in healthcare. So have you got any ideas of how you might incorporate that or how you might think about framing that?
Yeah, so maybe like the number of exercises you give them on a busy day versus a not so busy day, or when they could do it, for example, during lunch breaks or maybe towards the end of the day, something they could do for 5 minutes, while their lunch is cooking kind of thing. Yeah.
That's really cool. Andy, you were nodding along furiously there. Yeah, that's it. Habit stacking, right? That's exactly what you've done there, Sabrina. It's actually a really cool idea. Vinay, any any thoughts for yourself? Anything that stood out?
Anything sort of at the Therapeutic Alliance?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I think the biggest one is the first one, zoom in and zoom out. I think, if part of being a guide is having that trust and empathy, that comes down to you knowing what the landscape is as well. And if you can't see what that is, how can you guide someone else?
Yeah, exactly right. We talk about in other webinars, we've discussed the black swans and white swans, right? Known unknowns, identifying blind spots, things like that. That does flow quite nicely into being able to zoom in and zoom out, because if you can zoom out far enough, then you might actually pick up on a lot of black swans. Then if you're so hyper focused and so narrowed, you might actually be able to identify those. And they might actually not really be black swans. They might have been there all along. They might be actually in plain sight. You just haven't been able to zoom out and see the bigger picture. But you're right, like framing things appropriately. I've made a joke in the past that sometimes with patients, I can almost see the matrix and I see all these problems and these solutions that come forwards and drop down in front of me. And I'm almost doing this mathematical kind of calculation of like what question to ask and what drill to give and where I think I'm going to go. But that's really what it's a lot of the time it's about. Sometimes we don't have the time to do that. Sometimes our patients don't have the time to sit there and be patient as we uncover those and unravel those things, which is where it is so important to be able to really quickly zoom out, be able to see that picture, and then give them a clear plan. It doesn't have to be specific, but a clear plan from start point to end point. It's really cool. Andy, any other things that stand out to you? I know you and I go backwards and forwards on this a lot, and we talk about this a lot here at Proform as well. But if you were to pick one of those six, and I know that's tough for you to pick one of those six, what would be the key one for you if you were to give advice to another Sabrina who might be listening to this as well?
I would say I would have to agree with Vinay, just because it's the first step in the process. Because part of your ability to zoom in and zoom out and gather context and perspective allows you to position yourself first and foremost in what you can actually do for that person. Because to your point, Sabrina, like if you've got a patient who's a little bit more difficult, let's just say, or one who's got a bit more time pressure, or doesn't have access to a gym, or doesn't have access to other equipment and other things that would otherwise constitute what they need for an exercise protocol, for example, or something like that, and you don't know that about them. And when you deliver your pitch on your exercise, the first thing that they're going to say to you is, I don't have that. I don't have a gym. I don't have time for that. So part of your ability to zoom in and get granular comes down to like your ability to perform a really, really good history and a really, really good subjective, and take in all those things, and then be able to zoom out and connect the dots with how you go with position them into the next stage of their rehab. So sometimes, like if you could get really, really good there, it actually answers a lot of your questions for you, because like once you have perspective, then yes, we use the word onboarding here, but the other thing that we often say is that we invite them into their own story. So I guess if someone's gonna, if a patient has a rehab journey that they're about to start on, part of your ability to zoom in and zoom out and provide clarity and context actually invites them into that space. It allows you to deploy, I guess, a relevant amount of professional separation, almost like a parent watching their kid ride a bike for the first time, if you can think about it that way. Okay, because if you're one of those helicopter parents who swoop in when little Johnny's about to fall off, and little Johnny can't experience, I guess, that little setback and learn from that, you're actually not empowering little Johnny all that much. And even though he might cry and scream, you've got a better amount of information, so you can deploy a level of tactical empathy. You can deploy a series of plans And also too, because you have that context and perspective, you also have the perspective to also pivot where appropriate, you know. So you have contingencies of which you can lay down. So a lot of really cool things that you can do there. But zoom in and zoom out is the one for me.
Yeah, that's the one that really sets the whole process in motion, right, Ando?
Definitely.
Yeah. Now, based on all of that, I know early in my career, I mentioned this earlier, I felt, whether it was right or wrong, whether it was just by circumstance, I felt like I needed to be the hero. And that put me in hospital in my first year as a physio. That had me burning out, burning the candle at every end, because I was trying to be the hero for everybody else, be the savior. And that was real tiring. So I really would encourage every single person who does listen to this to just sit back, give yourself a moment, give yourself a day, whatever, and think, have you been, or are you preparing yourself if you're just about to step out in your career? Are you the guide or are you the hero? Because how you do one thing is how you do everything, as Andy loves to quote. And being the hero has its benefits, has a real big ego boost, but it has more downfalls than it does benefits. And if we are in healthcare, if we are here to help people, if we are here to have the most impact we can only do that if we are guiding our patients along their journey. And that's it. Guys, thank you for your patience. You have listened to me talk for the last 50 minutes. I do apologize for you having to listen to me, but also thank you for hanging. Andy's throwing party signs out at me. That is awesome. Thanks, Andy. And now his camera's frozen. Oh, and he's back. Guys, that is wrapping up our little presentation on being guide. Okay. It is something that I hope everybody who does watch this back has taken one or two things from. If you have, awesome. We'd love to hear it. Send us messages, send us emails, send us DMs. I don't know if anyone actually uses their emails anymore. I don't know. Andy has 1,000 unread emails in his inbox, so maybe he doesn't. Yeah, no, it doesn't. But apparently the DMs are where it's at. So if you are listening to this and you do see this on YouTube or the recording, the recording will get sent out to everybody. But send us a message. We'd love to have a chat. Andy will hopefully reply to some of the DMs as well if they come through the Proform University one, so they don't blow up my phone. But I did want to take a few minutes right at the end of this as we're wrapping up to just once again share with everybody one of the projects that Andy and I have been working on. It's our little brainchild. I was about to say love child, but it's not. Our little brainchild over the last 12 months or so. And it's called the Gemba. And Andy came up with the word. It's a Japanese word, if I'm right, Andy. Yep, he's nodding along. It's a Japanese word, which loosely translated into English means a place where value is created. Didn't really flow that well as a little tagline, so we called it Where Value is Born. Now, I don't know if you know Japanese, doesn't matter if you don't. The Genba is our name for one of the very few personal development courses that are available for healthcare practitioners. It's a 12-week course where we have lectures, live group calls, and way too much self-directed learning, which Andy and I have cultivated over quite a period of time and cherry-picked out the things that we believe will set the standard for healthcare moving forwards, seeing people grow in their ability to be the guide and see people grow in their ability to become a values-driven practitioner and a values-driven person rather than a results-driven person. So in the Gemba, we have weekly lectures delivered by yours truly and Andrew. We have our 1-hour live calls. We have self-directed learning, and we have buddy time, which is a peer mentoring. Okay, we have peer-to-peer mentoring. That is something that we also do and a concept that we took from Proform. And I can vouch personally that that's probably one of my favorite times of the week, whether that's being roasted on the internet at the driving range with Andy, or whether that's meeting up with some of the other guys who I don't see as often. It's one of the best periods of my week where I get to have others have some, show some interest in my career and in my life, but also be able to have access to so many other brilliant minds. And that's something that we're actually quite proud of. And I'm also really glad that Vinay's here on this call as well, because he's just actually finished the most recent intake of the Gemba, the most recent cohort. And Vinay, what was if you had to pull on it, right, out of all those things that are listed there, what would be one of the things that you cherished the most and you valued the most?
I would probably roll with the group call. That's probably where you get the most brains in one room at one time, just to kind of rehash over the concepts that you've gone through in the weekly lecture and work on some of those activities and things like that. So I'd probably say the group call.
Yeah. And the group call is really good as well. You get Andy, you get me, you get everybody else in the cohort. We were very lucky that the most recent group had some practitioners that were, up to Vinay, 8 years graduated, 8 years out as a physio, 5 years, all the way down to new grads, who were all able to bounce off each other and provide feedback and provide different perspectives. It's a really powerful hour of power of learning. And every week, Andy and I walk away learning something new about others, and also something new about the power of what we've created. You also get access to the course discussion boards, and for the rest of your life, access to those discussion boards and the platform on school. So this is not just for 12 weeks, this is forever. Now, normally that's $3.5 grand. But because Andy and I are a bit crazy, we have a cohort starting in 4 days' time, 5 days' time. And we decided to do something pretty crazy because we appreciate everything and all of the support that everybody has shown us, and all of the faith that people have shown in us by jumping on these webinars. And for those that do watch this back, or those that are here, from now until Friday, when Andy and I go off for our weekends, this course will be heavily reduced. Not because we don't find value in it, but because we want as many people as possible to be able to take the leap and partner with us to set the trajectory for their careers on a path where they can have the most amount of impact and the most amount of fulfillment possible. And that's it. If you are interested, and that does sound like you, I have just really quickly, because I'm running my whole mission control on my own, I am putting a type form in the chat where, if you'd like to jump on, that will send you straight to the link that will be able to get this process started and get you involved in the Gemba. And if that's not you, that's totally cool. If you're not already in school and on our school platform, Proform University, that link is already there as well. And we would love to see everyone's faces in there as much as possible. Andy and I, and I'll shout out Vinay as well, because he posts a lot of stuff in there for us as well. I remember seeing something about you going for a 3-plate squat, Vinay, is that correct?
Yeah, we'll make it 4 plates now.
4 plates now. All right, 4 plates. Those patella tendons will have a great bit of fun with that. Yep, that's awesome. We'll book you in for a consult soon. But we have over 100 people on that platform already. So if you're not involved, now is as good a time as any to jump in and learn from the group mind and the think tank that we've got, that Andy has cultivated pretty magically. And that wraps us up, guys. I've finished talking. I cannot talk for another minute. That is 7:32 p.m. and I have nothing else to add. Andy, do you have any parting words for the rest of our crew? Wingardium Leviosa. Fantastic. Thanks, Andy. What a nerd. He's coughing up his guts. Look, he's done. He's done. I'm not going to make him talk. Mate, do some perks and vibes on yourself, all right? Do some chest physio. Guys, thank you so much for hanging with us. It's been real. It's been fun. I'm going to stop talking. You guys all go have dinner. Go spend time with your family. If you have any questions, any comments, any concerns, best two ways to contact us: email pfu@proformphysiotherapy.com.au or on the old Instagram @proformuniversity. It's been real, guys. Have yourselves a lovely evening. Vinay, see you soon, I'm sure. Sabrina, it was good to see you again. Fantastic. I hope you got something out of it. Andrew, don't spread COVID. See you guys all soon.